On Christmas Eve, my brother stormed into my house and yelled, "We'll be celebrating here from now on." I took a sip of my cocoa and said, "I hope you brought a tent." His face turned pale when he realized. I was sitting by the fireplace, enjoying the quiet hum of a Christmas Eve without chaos for the first time in years. The tree lights flickered softly, and the scent of cinnamon and pine filled the air. My cocoa was hot, the kind with tiny marshmallows that melted just right. The house was peaceful. Then the front door slammed open so hard I thought the hinges might snap. I turned my head slowly, already knowing who it was before I even saw him. My brother, Ethan, stood there, panting, his face red from the cold, or maybe from rage. His coat was half unzipped, his hands clenched into fists. His wife, Rachel, stood behind him, arms crossed, her face a tight mask of frustration. "We'll be celebrating here from now on," Ethan announced, like he was declaring war. I took a slow sip of my cocoa, savoring the warmth. "I hope you brought a tent." His face drained of color. Rachel inhaled sharply, like she was bracing for whatever was about to come next. I set my mug down on the coffee table and leaned back. Something tells me this isn't a friendly Christmas visit. Ethan's jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. I walked in on Dad and he stopped, shaking his head like he couldn't even bring himself to say it. His voice dropped. He was cheating on Mom. With a woman half his age. In their own house. On Christmas Eve. The room fell silent except for the crackling fire. Rachel looked away, rubbing her temples like she had a headache coming on. "Mom lost it," Ethan continued, running a hand through his hair. "She was screaming, throwing things, crying. Dad just stood there like an idiot, making excuses. Then she told us all to leave. Kicked all of us out. Even me and Rachel." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. He shook his head. "She said she didn't want to see anyone. Said Christmas was ruined. Told me I had a choice, either I support her or I go live with that man." My stomach sank. Our mother wasn't one for empty threats. Ethan let out a bitter laugh. "So, yeah, we grabbed whatever we could and left. Figured we'd come here since you're the only one with a house big enough." I exhaled slowly. "And you didn't think to call first?" He threw his hands up. "I was kind of dealing with a family crisis, man." Rachel, who had been silent this whole time, finally spoke up. "Look, we'll sleep on the floor if we have to." She closed her eyes for a second, steadying herself. "I can't go to a hotel right now. My wallet was in my bag. My bag was in the living room. And I sure as hell wasn't about to walk back in there and grab it while your mom was throwing wine glasses at your dad's head." I pressed my fingers against my temples. This was a lot to process. "All right," I muttered. "All right, fine. But you're explaining all this to my wife." Rachel let out a breath of relief. Ethan nodded. Just as I was about to shut the door, a car pulled up in my driveway. My stomach dropped again. A familiar figure stepped out into the snow. Mom. Her eyes were swollen, her face red with anger, betrayal, exhaustion. She was gripping the steering wheel so tight I could see her knuckles from where I stood. And just like that, I knew Christmas Eve had only just begun. Mom didn't even bother turning off the engine. She yanked the door open and stepped out, her boots crunching against the snow. She was still wearing the same dress she had on for the family dinner, but now there was a red stain on the front. Wine, maybe, or something worse. Her hair was a mess, her mascara smudged under her eyes. She looked at Ethan first, then Rachel, then at me. "Are you going to let me in, or do I have to stand out here all night?" Her voice was hoarse, like she'd been screaming for hours. I stepped aside without a word. She walked in like she owned the place, brushing past Ethan without even looking at him. Rachel followed her with her eyes, but stayed frozen near the door. Mom dropped her purse on the floor and made a beeline for the kitchen. A second later, I'd heard the fridge open, the sound of bottles clinking together. I walked in after her, half expecting her to pull out a bottle of wine, but instead, she grabbed the carton of orange juice and poured herself a glass with shaking hands. She took a long sip, then set the glass down with a deep breath. Ethan leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" She let out a dry laugh. "Oh, you mean besides your father screwing some 20-year-old in my house? Besides the fact that my own son stood there like a lost puppy while I threw him out with the rest of the trash?" Ethan flinched. "Mom," she held up a hand. "Save it. I don't want your excuses. You sat there, Ethan. You watched. You didn't say a damn thing until I was the one who had to tell him to get out." Ethan's face turned red. I was in shock. I didn't know what to do. "You should have done something," she snapped, slamming her palm against the counter. "You should have stood up for me. You should have told him what a disgusting piece of garbage he is." Ethan's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. "I did, Mom. After you threw us out, I told him he was a selfish bastard. That he destroyed everything. That I'd never forgive him. Mom stared at him for a moment, her breathing heavy. Then she turned her gaze to me. And you, she said, her voice quieter, but no less sharp. Did you know? I froze. Because the truth was I did. Not the details, not who it was with, not that it would happen on Christmas Eve of all nights. But I had seen the signs. The late-night phone calls. The sudden business trips. The way Dad had started dressing nicer, wearing cologne he never used to wear. The way he and Mom barely spoke anymore. I had my suspicions. I just never said anything. And now, standing there in my kitchen with my mom looking at me like I was just as bad as Dad, I felt the guilt settle deep in my stomach. The words wouldn't come out. Mom's expression hardened. She let out a bitter laugh and shook her head. Of course, you knew. Ethan looked at me sharply. Wait, you knew. Rachel's eyes widened. Oh, God. I swallowed hard. I didn't know for sure. But you thought it was possible, Mom said, her voice ice cold. I rubbed the back of my neck. Yeah. Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. Then Mom did something I didn't expect. She smiled. Not a real smile. A small, bitter, almost amused smile. You know what's funny, she said. I was going to come here and tell you both that I was done. That I was leaving him. That I wasn't going to waste another second of my life on that man. She grabbed her purse off the counter and straightened her shoulders. But now I realize I don't have anyone left in this family I can trust. The words hit harder than a slap to the face. Mom, come on, Ethan said, stepping forward. That's not fair. She turned on him with fire in her eyes. Not fair? Not fair? You think any of this is fair? I gave that man 35 years of my life, Ethan. I built a home with him. I raised 2 boys with him. And now, on Christmas Eve, I find out I've been made a fool of. And my own sons, her voice cracked, my own sons didn't even warn me. I had never seen her look so broken. She turned toward the door, gripping her purse like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Rachel finally spoke, her voice soft. Where are you going? Mom reached for the doorknob. Anywhere but here. Then she walked out into the cold night, leaving all of us standing there, speechless. The door clicked shut behind her, and for a moment, no one moved. The only sound was the hum of the heater and the faint crackling of the fireplace. The air was heavy, thick with words left unsaid. Then Ethan swore under his breath and grabbed his coat. I'm going after her. Rachel shot him a look. Ethan, it's freezing out there. I don't care, he snapped, already heading toward the door. She shouldn't be alone right now. I sighed, rubbing a hand over my face. She's not thinking straight. She just needs time to cool down. Ethan turned on me, his face still flushed with anger. Time? Time for what? To decide whether or not she wants to talk to us again. You heard what she said. She doesn't trust us anymore. Well, what do you want me to do, Ethan? I shot back, my voice rising. I can't change the past. I didn't know for sure about Dad, and even if I did, what was I supposed to do? Tell her and ruin everything even sooner. Ethan let out a humorless laugh. Oh, yeah. God forbid we ruin Christmas a few months earlier. Rachel sighed, stepping between us. Guys, stop. This isn't helping. Ethan shook his head, then turned back toward the door. I'm going after her. Before anyone could stop him, he stormed out into the cold night, the door slamming behind him. I exhaled, pressing my fingers against my temples. This is a disaster. Rachel crossed her arms, her face tense. You really didn't think to tell anyone? Not even Ethan. I gave her a tired look. Would it have changed anything? She didn't answer. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then my phone buzzed. I frowned, pulling it out of my pocket. Dad. Rachel saw the name on the screen and tensed. You're not seriously going to answer that, are you? I hesitated. Then, against my better judgment, I swiped to accept the call. Hello? There was silence for a moment. Then, Dad's voice came through, low and hoarse. She's gone. I stiffened. What? Dad exhaled shakily. Your mother. She left. She took the car and just drove off. My stomach sank. Rachel's eyes widened. What is it? I held up a hand, focusing on Dad's voice. What do you mean she left? I mean she packed a bag, grabbed the keys, and took off, Dad said, his voice unsteady. She didn't say where she was going. Just that she was done. She said she never wanted to see me again. I swallowed. Dad let out a bitter laugh. I deserved that, didn't I? I didn't answer. Listen, Dad continued. I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve anything from her. But she's out there, and I don't know where she went, and it's Christmas Eve. I need to know she's safe. I rubbed my temple. She was just here. Silence. Then, more urgently, is she still there? I glanced at the door. No. She left a few minutes ago. Ethan went after her. Dad swore under his breath. Damn it. We need to find her. Rachel looked at me, her expression a mix of disbelief and frustration. You're not seriously thinking of helping him, are you? I hesitated. Dad's voice was quiet. She might not want to see me again. I get that. But if anything happens to her, I'll never forgive myself. A knot formed in my stomach. For all the terrible things he had done, for all the pain he had caused, he was still my father. And Mom was out there alone, in the middle of the night, with no one knowing where she went. I had a choice to make. And I knew, no matter what, things were never going to be the same again. Christmas betrayal. The moment I ended the call, I knew I was making a mistake. But it was too late to back out now. Rachel was staring at me like I had lost my mind. You're really going to help him? I sighed, rubbing my temples. Rachel, Mom is out there, alone, at night, in the middle of winter. I don't give a damn about Dad right now. I just need to find her. She folded her arms. And if he shows up? If he tries to talk his way back in? I didn't have an answer for that. Rachel exhaled sharply. Fine, but I'm coming with you. We grabbed our coats and I grabbed my keys. As we stepped out onto the icy driveway, Ethan was nowhere to be seen. His footprints trailed down the snow-covered sidewalk, disappearing into the dark. I tried calling him. No answer. I tried calling Mom. Straight to voicemail. I muttered a curse under my breath. Where the hell did they go? Rachel shivered beside me. Where would your mom go when she's upset? I thought for a moment. Then it hit me. The lake house. We drove in silence, the roads empty except for the occasional passing car. The lake house wasn't far, maybe 20 minutes away, but in this weather, it felt like an eternity. I gripped the wheel tightly, my knuckles white. My mind was racing, running through every possibility. What if Mom was there? What if she wasn't? What if Ethan found her first? What if Dad did? Rachel was the first to break the silence. What are you going to say to her? I shook my head. I don't know. I just want her to know she's not alone. Rachel studied me for a moment, then nodded. Good. We turned onto the long, winding road that led to the lake house. The snow-covered trees cast eerie shadows in the headlights. As we got closer, I spotted 2 cars already parked outside. Ethan's and Mom's. Rachel and I exchanged a glance before stepping out into the cold. The wind bit at my face as I trudged toward the cabin. The lights were on inside. Someone was there. I knocked once. No answer. I knocked again, harder. This time, the door swung open. Ethan stood there, his face flushed from the cold, or maybe from whatever argument had just taken place. His eyes were wild, his jaw tight. She's inside, he muttered. I stepped past him and saw her. Mom sat on the couch, wrapped in an old blanket, staring into the dying fireplace. She looked so small, so lost. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Mom. She didn't look at me. You shouldn't have come. I hesitated, then sat down across from her. Neither should you. She let out a weak laugh, but there was no humor in it. I just needed to get away. I glanced at Ethan. What happened? Ethan sighed, rubbing his face. She won't come home. She says she's done. Rachel, who had been quiet up until now, spoke up. Can you blame her? Ethan shot her a glare, but didn't argue. I turned back to Mom. Where will you go? She finally met my eyes. I don't know. I just know I can't stay there anymore. A painful silence settled between us. Then, another car pulled up outside. My stomach dropped. We all knew who it was before we even saw him. Dad. The front door swung open, and there he was. He looked different. His usual confidence, his smooth-talking charm, it was all gone. He looked exhausted, defeated. His coat was dusted with snow, his eyes bloodshot. Mom stiffened. Ethan took a step closer to her, like he was ready to shield her if necessary. Rachel didn't move. Dad's voice was quiet. Can we talk? Mom let out a bitter laugh. Talk? Now you want to talk. Dad swallowed hard. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. You're damn right you don't, Ethan cut in, his voice shaking with anger. Dad looked at him. I understand if you hate me. Both of you. But this isn't about me. It's about her. He turned back to Mom. I just needed to see you. To make sure you're okay. Mom shook her head, her hands gripping the blanket tighter. You don't get to do this, Robert. You don't get to act like the concerned husband now. Not after what you did. Dad's face twisted with guilt. I know. He exhaled sharply. I ruined everything. I betrayed you. I hurt you. And I'll never be able to take it back. Mom's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Why? Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried more weight than any scream. Dad looked away, his jaw clenched. I don't know. Ethan scoffed. Bullshit. Dad ran a hand through his hair, his shoulders sagging. I wish I had some grand excuse, some reason that would make sense. But the truth is, I was selfish. I was stupid. And I destroyed the one thing that actually mattered. Mom let out a shaky breath. Did you love her? Dad flinched. No, Mom's lip trembled. Then why was she worth throwing away 35 years? Dad's face crumpled. She wasn't. Silence. Rachel shifted uncomfortably. Ethan looked away. Mom wiped at her eyes, sniffling. You need to leave. Dad hesitated, then nodded slowly. He turned to Ethan and me. I know I don't deserve to ask for anything, but I hope one day you'll understand. Ethan's expression was stone cold. I won't. Dad looked at me. I wanted to say something, anything, but I couldn't. He nodded, like he already knew my answer, then turned and walked out into the cold. We listened as his car started, as the tires crunched against the snow, as the engine faded into the distance. Mom let out a long breath, her entire body shaking. Rachel sat down beside her, squeezing her hand. Ethan stood by the fireplace, his jaw tight. I sat there, staring at the floor, trying to process everything. We stayed at the lake house that night. No one said much. In the morning, Mom made coffee. Ethan and I sat at the table, sipping in silence. She looked at us both, then exhaled. I'm going to file for divorce. Ethan nodded. Good. I swallowed the lump in my throat. What do you need from us? She smiled sadly. Just to know I'm not alone. And for the first time in a long time, I knew she wasn't. None of us were. Christmas was different that year. No big family dinner. No presents under the same tree. No pretending everything was perfect. But somehow, despite everything, it felt real. And maybe that was enough.